Welcome back to Core Anesthesia. Whether you are a student prepping for tests and boards or a CRNA here to earn CEUs, we are glad you've joined us. For more about us, make sure to check us out on Instagram at Core Anesthesia and online at coreanesthesia.com.
Welcome back to Core Anesthesia. I'm Cole here with Tanner, and today we want to do a discussion from our 2022 Student Anesthesia Conference in July. We're so excited to announce that several of the speakers gave us their permission to go ahead and post a recorded session so that those that were unable to attend would be able to benefit from the knowledge and wisdom that they had to pass on. We know it was beneficial to a lot of the people that were able to listen to it live, and we hope it'll be beneficial to you today. But now, without further ado, I'm going to jump into our fourth session. So if you're just joining us, we're going to be starting to talk about insurances and the insurance standpoint from the CRNA world. But first, I want to give a message from our sponsor, which is Independence Anesthesia Services. Independence Anesthesia Services is a division of IMN Enterprises, LLC, and has remained passionately committed to exceptional patient care by building, developing, and maintaining long-term relationships with facilities and providers since 2003. We bring together vetted and reliable locum tenens anesthesia providers with quality facilities and competitive pay for short and long-term assignments nationwide. Again, grateful for all of our sponsors that have put on this conference and allowed us to offer it to all of you for free if you're just joining us. And so each sponsor has designated a certain session. But now let's get into our content today. So we're going to be talking about CRNA insurance. And as I mentioned, this speaker is going to be coming from the director of the AANA Insurance Services, Julie Nycum, who's a wholly owned subsidiary of the American Association of Nurse Anesthesiology. And Julie worked for Medical Protective, a Berkshire Hathaway Company, for 24 years as the vice president of underwriting. She contracted John Fetcho in 2006 to develop products and services tailored to meet the needs of CRNAs as a carrier for the AANA IS. Prior to that, Julie worked in a commercial lines managing General Underwriting Agency and has served 2 enlistment terms in the Air National Guard. So we're so thankful that Julie has chosen to come speak with us today. And then, Julie, I will add your content here, and you should be able to start whenever you're ready. Thank you for joining with us.
All right, thank you. I'm excited to present to you a few key insurance concepts that I believe will equip you to select an insurance company that will be there when you need them, that will give you a voice in the handling of your claim, protect your reputation, protect the investment you have in your career while protecting your financial assets. So today I'm going to go ahead and, if I can, will I be able to move the screen? Yeah. So a few disclosures. I do have a financial relationship, as Cole mentioned, with the AANA. They own us and our members own us. And I will not discuss any off-label use because I don't know how to use insurance off-label. But learner outcomes, we're going to talk or differentiate between 2 coverage types that are very common in medical malpractice, the difference between occurrence and claims made, and the difference between an admitted insurance company and a non-admitted insurance company. So that's our key focus. And along the way, we'll find out a little bit more about coverage triggers and limits and a few other things. So to get grounded, the average CRNA non-dental claim is $342,000, the indemnity payment to the insured. So there's also legal expenses on top of that. The average legal expense to defend a CRNA, even if you did nothing wrong, is $43,000, and 82% of claims are closed without any payment to the patient, which by then is the plaintiff. So the most important, you get a stack of papers when you buy an insurance policy, right? And the most important provision in there, in my opinion, is the consent to settle clause. This will describe how the company will settle your claim and whether or not you have a voice in that. A pure consent to settle, our carrier MedPro has that. It's very simple. So if you see in the policy consent to settle, because they're all going to be named the same title for that section, and it's got a lot of wording under it, that's a problem. For MedPro, it's just, we will not settle any claim without your consent. And that's why we chose that particular carrier. The other types of consent, and most non-admitted carriers would have this, but definitely admitted has it as well, is we call it consent with a hammer clause. So it has all this extra wording that basically says, If the insurance company goes out and settles, now you paid premium to the insurance company, they're representing you. But on the side, if they go over and settle with the patient and the patient's attorney, the plaintiff, and they come back and they say, hey, we can settle this for $200,000. And you say, I didn't do anything wrong. I maintained the standard of care. I want to fight this. And they say, oh, okay, no problem. But any dollar in excess of $200,000 will come out of your pocket. And any expenses from this day forward, if we have to pay extra over the $200,000, will be out of your pocket as well. And legal defense costs can be $300, $500 in the Bay Area, $750, $800 an hour. So it's very difficult. It's a stressful time already. And for them to require you to sign off that you're going to take that bet and hopefully win, because then you're fine as long as you win and pay nothing, or you can pay up to the $200,000 even, if that's what the court decides, that's fine. But anything over, then you end up paying all the legal expenses from that day forward. So look out for that. And now we're going to kind of look through or show you how limits work, both per occurrence, and it would work about the same way for claims made. So let's go. We're going to have two examples, and we're going to use these examples over and over again. So that in this particular example, we have very low limits in the example, 100,000, 300,000. There's a patient compensation fund where that might be acceptable, but most states it wouldn't be. It would be too low. But you can see where the first claim comes in and is settled at $63,000, and it's covered because it's within the per occurrence or per claim limit of $100,000. The second claim settles at $107,000. So the carrier will only pay the $100,000 and the $7,000 would come out of your pocket. So that's how the occurrence side works. Now let's talk about the aggregate. The aggregate limit is usually an annual aggregate, but if you join a group, you might have, 9 months before their common renewal date or 3 months, whatever. So that it's whatever the policy period is, it's the aggregate for that policy period. So in our same examples, you can see where the $300,000 aggregate is reduced by the $63,000 payment, and now you have $237,000 remaining. And after only the $100,000, you paid the $7,000. You have a remaining annual aggregate in this example of $137,000. So that's, kind of pure and simple how the limits work. Now we're going to talk about usual and customary. And this is really a tort reform issue. It goes all the way back to the 70s when premiums shot up 300% and reimbursement rates were nowhere near adequate to pay for that type of increase in premiums. So all these states started doing things to attract providers to their states, to retain providers in their states, because a lot of providers retired if they were near retirement. It was impossible to find OBs at the time. It was just they couldn't afford to pay for the premium anymore. So here are normally in most states, 1 million, 3 million are the usual and customary limits. There's also patient compensation fund states, and we'll look at that on the next slide. But in non-fund states and in these 3 states, they have usual and customary limits of, for Florida, $250,000, $750,000, and Michigan and Texas, $200,000, $600,000. I see that changing more and more. You'll have facilities that require 1 million, 3 million, and everyone that wants to provide services in that facility will have to bump them up. And that's fine. We offer a menu of limits. But my main message here is that you never want to have the highest limits. There's limits up to 3 million, 5 million. But during the course of a claim, the plaintiff attorney will, during the discovery process, find out you have these giant limits, and you will be a target, and they will try very hard during the deposition process to pull you in to access your limits. So it's important to understand what usual and customary limits are. You're always welcome, whether you're an insured of ours or not, you're welcome to call the team, and they can share what usual and customary limits are in your state so that you can choose what's adequate. If the facility is requiring a certain limit, that's a good sign. You're all getting those same limits. And that way, no one's a deep pocket. This is the patient compensation fund. There's another fund state, but CRNAs do not participate in it. So for CRNAs, these are the particular states that require patient compensation fund coverage. And what happens there is, in these cases, the state decided they were going to get involved in actually handling medical malpractice cases. And so you have to buy coverage from both the retail agent or carrier, us, and these are the limits we would be offering. And then there's a cap on damages for the state. And between the retail rate limits and the cap on damages, the state comes in and takes over the claim as you get to that point and finishes handling the claim and pays out any excess over the retail limits. So the good news is it does work to maintain a little bit lower premiums in those states. The bad news is the states managing, medical malpractice and the sign-up process for that, they make up their rules and we all have to jump when they change anything. So it's very easy to gap yourself. So if you find out that they have a deadline, you have to meet that deadline or they will create a gap in your coverage. You will no longer have the protection of the cap on damages and you'll only have your primary limits. So when you work in these kind of states, just make sure you really watch out for those dates and never miss a date. It might only be a 1 week gap or a 2 week gap, but Murphy's Law, something will happen and you don't want them to be able to access your personal assets. When you have those caps on damages and these limits are all covering all potential, then they can't access your personal assets. So that's the advantage of having, those caps established. Now we're going to talk about, there's two different policy types for medical malpractice: occurrence and claims made, and we're going to differentiate between the two of those. Occurrence is very simple. As long as the malpractice incident occurs during the policy period, the claim is covered, no matter when it's reported. Now, when we talk about incident, it means the service, the alleged incident happened, the service was rendered during that policy period. Okay, so we have two examples. We're going to run through this with the occurrence example and with the claims made example. So the policy period we're using in the example is January 1, 2020 to January 1, 2021. In this example, the incident or service occurred during the policy period. It's reported also during the policy period. It's covered, but what the real key driver here is that the service was rendered during the policy period. Okay. In the second example, we have the service or incident occurring during the policy period, but it's reported after the policy period ends. Ended January 1, 2021. It's reported June 3rd, 2021. It's still covered because the service was rendered during the policy period. Now with claims made, you have to provide both the service and the claim has to be reported during the policy. Now, there's ways to get around that, but in its purest form, this is how the trigger works for claims made. So you have kind of a two-pronged qualification to access coverage. In our same examples where the service is rendered during the policy period, the claim comes in during the policy period, it's covered. Just like it was for occurrence, it's covered under the claims made. In our second example, where it's reported outside of the policy period, it's not covered. So even though the service was during the policy period, it wouldn't be covered. So how do you get around that? You would buy an extended reporting period endorsement. It extends the period of time that you can report claims, and it's called tail coverage. So let's look at an example of if you purchase tail coverage. And in this example, it has the appearance of looking like, wow, they gapped. The policy ended January 1, 2021, but they didn't buy tail coverage until February. What happens is every state requires the carrier, when they offer tail coverage, they have to give at least 30 days after the expiration date of the policy for you to pay for it. There are some states that give you 60 days. And it's really not only 30 days after the policy period, but if they're late in billing you, it's 30 days after their bill whichever is longer, whichever is later. So is it the 30 days after the expiration date or after their letter? You get the benefit of their late billing if you'd get another 30 days. So in this example, it's covered because even though the claim is reported outside the policy period, you bought a tail. And even though you bought that tail on February 1, it's effective as of the expiration date of January 1. So it's going to be covered whether you reported it on January 1st, January 2nd, or in this case, June 3rd, 2021, it's covered. So claims made coverage is another result of tort reform. It is an easier way for insurance companies to predict losses. So we're going to talk about claim reporting trends. We're going to talk about how the premiums are developed. And we're going to talk about the rationale of why this type of coverage was created. So claims are not reported immediately for many professions. Anesthesia is probably quicker. And ironically, for CRNAs, you report it on average within like 5 days. You're just on it. Physicians, they take up to a year on average to report claims. They wait for the actual papers to come in. Our policy can be self-triggered, so a lot of you will trigger it like, hey, and that makes sense for claims made, because if you fail to buy tail, then you're going to be forced to buy tail when the papers come in, right? So the earlier you report it, then you've triggered coverage. So that makes sense. CRNAs they understand, I think, claims made coverage better than most specialties. So here's for CRNAs, claim reporting patterns. So we would expect 31% of all claims to come in that first year. Whether one came in or not, by the second year, we're expecting a 63% chance of claims to come in, 83% by the third year. And this is an unusual reporting pattern. It usually steps up higher and higher over time to the fifth year, but it starts reducing for anesthesia because it's, about some bad results earlier. But you're still at the mercy of whoever you're providing anesthesia for. If it's a surgical procedure and anesthesia went well, you'll still probably be named if a couple years later they think that their hip replacement wasn't placed correctly. They'll name everybody in the OR. So you'll still need to be defended. And so that is part of the reason why the claim reporting pattern still is out there stepping up over the next 5 years. And all specialties by the fifth year, actuarially, they believe most claims will be in. There will be some outliers, but most of them, all premiums stop stepping up after the fifth year. They consider that's the mature year, and it'll just keep repeating that mature rate after that. So again, the rationale for claims made coverage, that the claim reporting trend by specialty, premiums will track with that type of trend. As the likelihood of those claims increase, so does the claims made age premium. Those step up actually convert to actual premium. And it's easier for the carrier to predict losses. If you do not use your limits for a claims made policy, you lose them. And now it takes the services you rendered and moves them to your renewal policy or your tail policy. And you get a new fresh set of limits, but now you possibly have 2 years of services under one set of limits. And every time you renew, it does that. And you might have 5 years, 10 years, 15 years under one set of limits. So you use your limits or you lose them. And I don't encourage you to use them, but but they're not there for you anymore. And that's the difference really between claimsman and occurrence. And I'll show you a really good slide that demonstrates that in a few more slides here. So this is Ohio rate for CRNAs. These are Ohio rates and how they step up with that claims, the claim reporting pattern for CRNAs. So you can see we're starting out about $4,400, and we quickly step up by year 3, the 83% of all claims coming in year, $7,548, and then really slight increments to the mature rate of almost $8,000. So that's how, that translate for CRNAs. It can translate differently for other specialties. So another way to be able to report future claims is by renewing your policy. And the way for claims made, the first time you buy a claims made policy, that first effective date, in our example, January 1, 2020, that is the line in the sand that says as long as services were rendered after the retro date of January 1, 2020, in our example, then it'll be covered. It may be covered under a future policy, but because if you don't use the limits, you're on to a next policy, right? So that retro date stays out there as long as you're continuously renewing until you cancel. If you don't have claims made for a few years and you come back and start it all over again, then you establish a brand new retro date. But as you maintain a continuous series of policies, that retro date is the line in the sand, the test to say were services rendered after this date. So claims that occur and are reported after the retro date are covered. So in our same example, we saw how tail was the remedy and covered this claim that was reported outside the policy period. In a renewal example, so we still have this first policy, but it's renewed from now it's January 1, 2021 to an expiration date of January 1, 2022. And the claim comes in after that first policy period, but now during the renewal policy. The service or incident occurred August 28th, 2020. So it was during the first policy period, but it is covered because the retro date is January 1, 2020, and the service is after that retro date. So it passed that test, and there's an active claims made policy when the claim came in. So it can be reported, but under the renewal policy, and so it's covered. This is the same premium slide, that we showed, but in a different format. Ohio, full-time, self-insured, self-employed CRNA, just kind of grounding us on that premium and claims made age step. So in summary, extended reporting period endorsement tail allows the reporting of after the policy period is ended and there's cost. So that's why we were looking at premiums. What's the tail cost? This next slide kind of shows you those same Ohio premiums. And now you can see the tail cost is equal 100% of that premium, depending on the year you decide to tail out. So if you tail out the first year, you're going to be paying almost $8,800 that year. It's a pretty big, large amount. But if you keep renewing year after year and you decide to tail out fifth year, sixth year, whatever, it would be almost $16,000 that year. You would have paid the renewal premium and you would have had to have paid the tail premium. So that tail can create a fairly large financial event for you. And unfortunately, it isn't always your decision. Sometimes it could be that you've got your dream job and you need to leave and they'll provide you your coverage. They're not going to pick up your other employer's prior acts. Your coverage, that employer will force you to tail out. And depending on your contract, it may be you paying for it or maybe it's them paying for it. And we'll talk about questions to ask your employer later. But so you have to kind of be prepared for that financial event. It could also be triggered by, just bad luck and you have a claim frequency or claim severity and the carrier non-renews you. You weren't planning on it, but now you have to tail out. Nobody else wants to pick up those prior acts because of that severity or frequency trend. And they'll start you fresh, but not pick up your retro date. So you have to keep that in mind. Or patient compensation fund states don't let you take your exposure from that state to another state so they can trigger a tail event. So I just want you to understand how that balloon payment may not always be something you can plan for. So what is the cost of occurrence coverage? It's about 2% higher than the mature claims made rate. And in this example, using those Ohio rates, it's about $159 higher than the fifth year claims made rate. So now we're going to look at a 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year example to see how occurrence and claims made coverage costs compare. So 1 year, you can see because you have the balloon payment of the tail, it's actually more expensive after 1 year to pay for claims made coverage than it would have been to buy an occurrence policy. So there's a savings of $636 for the occurrence policy. For a 3-year example, there's a savings of $1,510 for the occurrence. Claims made is a little higher. And the same savings for a 5-year example, $1,510 less money to pay for the occurrence 5 years versus 5 years of claims made. Even though claims made stepped up over time, that tail will catapult you beyond what it would have cost for occurrence. Now we're going to talk about premiums and really the cost that it takes to defend you and indemnify your patient in any given state is the driver of the cost of premiums, right? So in South Carolina, it's not very litigious. And the first year premium's $883. We know that the mature rate's going to be closer to the occurrence rate. The occurrence rate is $1,638. In Las Vegas, Clark County, Nevada, the first year step premium is $5,758, but the occurrence and really ultimately the mature rate is going to be $10,678. So quite a range. And the reason we want to talk about this is there are different carriers that will enter the market. And one easy way to enter the market is a risk retention group. And a few years ago, CRNAs, physicians, a lot of providers were concerned that all of a sudden they didn't have coverage. There was a carrier called Oceanus that came in, and for CRNAs, they charged $2,500 countrywide. Well, we know $2,500 is not going to fund premiums or claims in Clark County, Las Vegas, Nevada, right? It'll probably be okay in South Carolina. And in fact, it's overcharging in South Carolina. So what happened? Well, first of all, premiums can be too cheap. And so just do the math. When you think about what would it cost to fund $1 million claim, it would have taken them 400 policies. They'd have to sell 400 policies to fund $1 million loss. But that wouldn't include the expenses for defense as well. So those are going to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars too for $1 million claim. And by then they would have exposed 400 million of limits. So that's why they got upside down very quickly. They were not an admitted company, so there was no one to bail them out. And even though you paid for premium, they were gone. They just were insolvent, and you had to pay for your own legal defense and your own claims. If that ever happens and you don't have a claim, immediately go out and find a good financially strong carrier and ask them to pick up your prior acts, because they only sold claims made, which is normal also, because they're looking for those predictable policy forms. But yeah, they didn't fund it correctly. So just beware of that. So occurrence is cheaper. It's portable. It's very simple to understand as long as services were rendered during the policy period. Whenever the claim comes in, you've got a pile of money. Every year, you have a pile of money sitting there. And it's less expensive, as we've been able to demonstrate in our 1, 3, and 5 year examples. So here's my little tacky slide. It's showing you how occurrence works. Every time you buy a policy, those limits stay out there until your estate is settled. Whether you use them or not, they're out there for you in case you ever need them. And sometimes minors, have until the age of majority and then the statute of limitations. So that's a fairly long tail where a claim could come in. So that would be one example. Or sometimes discovery, you get the statute of limitation upon discovery. Oh, you left something in my hip. That's why it's been bad. I've had these problems or whatever it might be. So, but with claims made, remember, every year you're buying coverage. If you don't use those limits or there's any limits left, you lose it. And you now move all those services over to the next year. And in this example, you have 6 years of services now covered by one set of 1 million, 3 million limits. So even the step ups look, even though those premiums look attractive initially, we know long term when you pay for the tail, it's more expensive, and you've diluted your limits. And if you're sharing limits with a bunch of other providers, and that happens in our profession, right? In a lot of the nursing professions or the PAs, whatever, now you are all sharing this diluted set of limits that keeps getting renewed year after year under a claims made. And if you don't use them, you've got this, one set of limits for all of you and all the services you've rendered. Okay, so now, who's buying your insurance? Isn't it nice when your employer provides your coverage? I mean, it's one less thing to worry about, right? But you still have to ask questions. And the reason for that, I'm going to share a quick phone call I've had in the last year. We had a member who, I think I already touched on this at the beginning, where the member, their employer did not purchase coverage that was adequate to meet their needs. And because of that, they were poorly defended. And now, even though they were, they maintained the standard of care, they could have difficulty securing coverage in the future, and their job opportunities could be limited. That's because they didn't know that their employer, the type of coverage they purchased. So I believe, Cole and Tanner, I've shared with you some resources that can be shared. It'll be a checklist that you ask your employer. It'll be a checklist to check when you're purchasing coverage. And it talks about different types of policies options out there to meet your needs. So a lot of and we also have some slides on, or in those resources about admitted, non-admitted, and claims made versus occurrence. So you'll have all of this in resources that are provided. So first I'll touch base for CRNAs, at least. We are, since we're owned and we're in contact with our state advocacy team and of course all of our CRNAs and our board, we tailor products around what we know the scope of practice is going to be, and we have them ready when those scope changes happen. We'll have them filed in all states, even though they might not be in your state, but slowly by, little at a time, we'll get those states and you'll have those policies. So we have moonlighting policies of 500, 1,000 hours, part-time, which is like 24 hours or less per week, or 1,250 hours a year. So you could work 30 hours one week, no hours the next, 10 hours, as long as you're hitting that aggregate. We have full-time, which unfortunately isn't limited. So if you're working 60 hours, it would cover you. Slot is a position policy, which if you have like a mini business and you say, hey, facility, my friends and I are going to cover this shift on every Monday. This slot policy, you'd be sharing limits, but it is for one FTE. And as long as we approve all your applications, you can, rotate in and out of that position and cover that for that particular facility. And it's easy to administer, and it just gets you kind of started in almost like a mini staffing organization, but your side business. We have group or combination, which means a fully owned CRNA group or a physician CRNA combination group. We have a supplemental policy, so it's a minimal limit of 100,000, 300,000, but unlimited defense. And so if your employer isn't very transparent about the type of coverage you have, we highly recommend, it's fairly inexpensive, that you purchase this, because a couple of things. We'll pay for an attorney to go with you. Even if your facility is asking you to provide a deposition, we'll have a dedicated attorney go with you. If you have a nursing board action, your employer isn't going to pay for that because they're not named, but this policy would give you a defense for that. And secondly, we'd send in an attorney to monitor whatever claim is being handled that you gave a deposition on, to make sure nothing's going to the data bank and surprising us, So those are the types of coverage when you're shopping for yourself that we have to offer. If it's your employer, well, even you should ask this. You need to ask if it's an admitted insurance company or a non-admitted insurance company. Admitted insurance companies have to be evidence-based. So we'll explain that a little bit more. Does my insurance company have a secure AM Best rating? That is an independent financial company that's been around since 1898, I believe. And admitted carriers have to open up their books every year, and they give financial strength ratings. So that's the way you can tell if they're able to deliver on their promise to defend and indemnify you. Do I have occurrence coverage? And if I have claims made coverage, will I have an opportunity to buy an unlimited tail? When you're with the non-admitted market, they usually only offer 1, 3, or 5 year tails. And that can be a problem if you're waiting for that claim to come in. And non-admitted often doesn't let you self-trigger a claim. You have to wait for legal papers to come in. So that when we talk about admitted, we're going to go through some slides here. So admitted carriers every state has to look at the rates, and they have to be evidence-based with an actuarial, signature support and all the math that goes with it to prove that that's what it takes to defend and indemnify this specialty in the state. Every admitted carrier pays into the state guarantee fund, which means in the rare instance, because admitted carriers are having a lot of oversight from AM Best. So in the rare instance someone goes insolvent, the state steps in and they have plenty of money to pay your claims. So you're not left holding the bag like you are with a non-admitted carrier. They have to have the broadest coverage possible because it's the state, you're their voting constituents. They want to make sure they take care of you. So you're going to have, you may or may not have pure consent to settle, but you'll have some form of consent to settle. You'll always have an unlimited tail option. Sometimes they will allow 1 or 3 year, 3 or 5 year tails, but the savings are not enough to even justify it. But they still have to, if you're an admitted carrier, have to offer an unlimited option too. The non-admitted or RRG companies, first of all, RRGs were just created to be an easy way to enter the market and create competition in the marketplace, but there's no oversight, so it fails at times. Non-admitted was created for those risks that did not meet the standards of the admitted market. So they're non-standard applicants. The non-admitted and RRGs are not under any scrutiny by the state. They can change their underwriting, they can change their rates and their coverage forms anytime they want. They usually protect themselves over their insureds. So the way that they have their wording to describe how they'll settle claims is called it's a deemed expedient clause. They will settle the claim as they deemed expedient, the cheapest, fastest way possible. So that's not necessarily conducive to maintaining or protecting your reputation. So some of the reasons you may have to go to a non-admitted carrier is because you've reached the standard of care or just frequency, severity. Sometimes it's just the type of environment you're practicing in. It's highly litigious. It's more susceptible to having claims. You may be doing everything right. It's just an area of medicine that people seem to sue more often. Substance abuse. I do want a little public announcement. Take care of yourself. Be proactive because you have such ready access to medication. It's hard for insurance companies to take our risks after a substance abuse. We can usually get you into the non-admitted market, but it will probably double the premium cost, less coverage, and you'll have to stay in there for 3 to 5 years. If it happens a second time, we may or may not be able to help you. We will certainly do everything we can and to find a solution for you. A third time, there is no solution anymore. So please take care of yourself. Remember, you've invested in yourself and your career. You're so good at this, but it's so critical that you take care of yourself and not, be subject to all this scrutiny. Every time you apply for a job, every time you apply for coverage, you have to explain all this and really fight to try to get people to take you. And that's not where you need to be, nor where you deserve to be. Sometimes licensure issue, you could be at a facility that did Medicare, Medicaid billing fraud. You didn't even know it, but you get caught up in a board action. That would be an example, but it is a way that, carriers would push you over to the non-admitted market for a while, and before you can come back. So non-admitted RRGs, in summary, instead of advantages, we list the disadvantages. No regulatory oversight, no state guarantee fund to protect you if they go insolvent, no consent to settle clause, no limited tail. There is limited tail coverage, no unlimited, and premiums can change anytime. And in times of high inflation, this is when they're going to get rate, and they can. We have to show evidence of why we need it. Can't just be the inflation only. I mean, they could take little increments though, because that does translate into the cost of defending claims, but they're not going to be able to take giant amounts like the non-admitted can. Okay, so what is the financial strength of your company that you're thinking about doing business with, or that your employer secured coverage with? We talked about AM Best. It's a very highly recognized, independent. No carrier can own it. It's been around forever. And they provide these financial ratings. I want to caution you, though, although they have crazy words next to these, like superior, excellent, very good, oh, no problem, adequate, oh, that sounds good, fair. However, most hospitals will not take anything lower than an A-. And keep in mind, an A- is one bad decision away from dropping into the Bs. So always look for an AM Best rating of A- or above, and maybe even A or above. Our carrier, MedPro, has an A++. It's a Berkshire Hathaway Company. So the considerations or questions you should ask, you need to get, during the honeymoon phase, when you're applying for your position, get a copy of their certificate of insurance. Like, can you show me the type of coverage I have? And when you get the certificate, it'll show their carrier name. It'll show their limits that they'll have for you. It should give some indication if they're giving you shared limit or separate limit. So you can call us, share a copy of that, and we'll explain to you, oh, that carrier is A-, or that is an A++ company. So we can just reassure you, like, yeah, it looks really good. Or you might ask more questions about this. It looks like it might be a shared limit. And it's claims made. Ask about your tail, who's going to be responsible for paying for that. So we'll coach you through that. But these checklists that you'll also receive will have that type of follow-up questions as well. Do you have your own individual limits? We talked about that. And what happens if there's a claim? Will you have a voice in the handling of your claim, or will they just settle it as they deem expedient? Or do they have a giant self-insured retention limit? A lot of facilities have $1 million that they handle in-house themselves. There's no policy language saying how they have to handle that. They could decide, you know what, there were 4 people in that OR. Sure, it might have been the surgeons, but he's our rainmaker. We're just going to delegate 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%. And all of a sudden you find out you've been reported to the data bank with part of that claim, and you maintain the standard of care in your anesthesia. But there isn't a contract in that area for them to have to tell you. So I think we've covered this. The one thing I want to show here is that we've also provided instructions on how to self-check the National Practitioners Data Bank. And just like your FICO score, you should check that once a year. So follow those instructions. It's free. And just to make sure there's nothing out there. If you've been deposed, check a little bit more frequently. And hopefully, though, you want to know before it goes to the data bank, because there's no way you can get it back out. It'll be there. And so the more proactive we can be, the better. There is a fine. All carriers, even self-insurance limits for the facilities, if they pay $1 in indemnity to the patient, or by them the plaintiff, it has to be reported, or there's a $10,000 fine. However, if they defend you and they pay $200,000 to defend you, nothing gets reported to the data bank because nothing was paid to the defendant, to the plaintiff. Sorry about that. Okay, and we're getting close here. So more than 90% of all claims are settled out of court. So, that's good, I guess, because the court process can be challenging. But if you do go to court, you want that A++ carrier by your side. and know that you've kind of got the big dog next to you, and other people standing there next to you may have a non-admitted carrier or an RRG, whatever it might be. You want that strength, that experience. So, and there are plenty of others out there as well. And just remember, any indemnity payment will always be reported to the data bank. Okay. Last thing, the average deposition expense is $2,600. Your group policy, if you're with a group of CRNAs or physicians, or your facility, hospital, surgery center policy is only while you're there. If you have a deposition for something, they may or may not give you your own legal counsel. So this is where that supplemental comes in. But the average expense is $2,600, and it's important. That's how they draw you in. It's important to be represented at a deposition with an attorney to get you prepped and to be in there to object if there's something they're asking that they don't need to. And the average the average nursing board expense is $4,100. And if the facility isn't named or your group isn't named, they're not going to provide coverage for nursing board action. So that's out of your pocket. So that's another reason to get the supplemental. Okay, so in closing, these are the questions to ask whether you're looking for coverage yourself or if your employer has it. Do I have an admitted carrier? Do I have a secure AM Best A- or above rating? Do I have a pure consent to settle? Very short language. My carrier will not settle a claim without my consent. If it's claims made, will I be offered an unlimited tail, and who's responsible for the cost of that? Finally, a quick vignette, because I want to leave some time to answer some questions. We call it the MAP program. On the AANA website, the Member Advantage program provides options for long-term disability, AD&D, accident, disability, health, sickness, term life insurance, accident, long-term care, health insurance coverage. However, their health insurance coverage is for a group of 3 or more. Otherwise, you have to go to the exchange for anything less. It's just the rule of the exchange. You have to have a larger group of 3 or more. They have dental insurance, pet insurance. Pet insurance, ironically, is one of our biggest, highest traffic websites. And it's just a riot to read all their names, the pets' names. But we have all of those resources there. The one thing about long-term disability, make sure it has a provision called own occupation, and that it says, for CRNAs at least, certified registered nurse anesthesiologists or CRNAs, because otherwise most disability policies will say, oh, you could just do work as an RN or an LPN or whatever. They don't care as long as they can put you in some type of spot. They won't pay you what you're worth as a CRNA. They'll try to make you keep working because you can sit and fill meds at a nursing home, or I don't know. But so you want to look for that own occupation. That's critical. But the rest are pretty cut and dry, and I think pretty self-explanatory. And our membership team and our partners at Hagen and Associates will be there to help you navigate through those options. That concludes my presentation, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you for listening to this pre-recorded session from our 2022 student conference. For more about our speakers, please read their bio in the show notes, and we'll see you on the next episode.